Dr. Christine Smith has focused her work on seeing the whole person through personalized integrative healthcare as a functional medicine practitioner and doctor of chiropractic with a background in cognitive neuroscience. She specializes in holistic injury recovery and health optimization to help active people come back stronger. She does this by teaching her clients to learn to work with their body rather than against it. Here's a clip from today's show.
It is an incredible organ, and I think probably one of the most complicated things in the universe. And I don't know if we'll ever fully understand it, but it is probably the greatest pharmacy we'll ever have access to. And we tend to demonize things like the placebo effect because it affects our research in a way that we don't like. But when we really look at it, the placebo effect means that your brain is able to create an outcome with literally no materials or substances. So your brain has the capacity to produce pretty much any chemical that you could need. And I think that's pretty amazing. Or like the fact that we can measure brain waves without an item touching your head, and we can measure it through basically magnetics. That means that you essentially emit your own Wi-Fi, and that is your biofield. And so when we start looking at our brain as not just this organ that directs stuff in our body, but really this connection to our energetic field and this director of our life force and this ability to alchemize whatever we need, it becomes much more profound.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to show some gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. If you are looking for a trustworthy place to choose all of your supplements, FullScript has 285 different brands to choose from. They did the work for you to check quality standards for all the supplements they carry. These standards are important because they help to ensure a product is safe, effective, and accurately labeled. FullScript uses third-party companies to provide unbiased assurance that certain quality criteria are met when they add a company or product to their inventory. When you set up an account with FullScript, use my link and you'll always get 15% off your supplements. Well, thank you so much again for being on today, Dr. Smith. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I love getting to talk about ways that people can feel more empowered and understanding how their body works and in their health.
Well, I've seen you on Instagram Live a few times and talking about the connection between the gut microbiome and hormone regulation and brain neurotransmitters, but maybe some of my listeners aren't familiar with you. So why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am Dr. Christine Smith. I am a chiropractor by my original training and my doctorate, but I have spent a lot of time studying functional medicine and cognitive neuroscience and nervous system regulation and gut health and really all the holistic modalities that allow us to balance our body naturally. And I generally say that I specialize in hidden injury recovery and chronic inflammation prevention. And I like talking about it in that way because people usually ask, well, what's a hidden injury? And that's often the things that we don't think about when we are going through some other kind of injury in our life. That can be a physical injury, it can be a chemical injury, or it can be an emotional stress, mental injury. And all of those have very similar effects on our biochemical cascade in the body. But the hidden things in that can be like if you're in a car accident and you go through a stress response in the body, you can actually get some leaky gut from that. Or if you have a big emotional thing happen in your life, like some kind of grief, you can also get some leaky gut from that. Or if we are dealing with a toxin exposure, then we often have a hyperimmune response and we can get the same kind of leakiness in the gut. And I keep mentioning that because it tends to be the foundation of so many other causes of dis-ease in the body. And if we can catch these biochemical cascades before they go down those pathways, we can then prevent disease later in life because we've caught it from progressing. So I really like teaching people about these biochemical pathways because I don't think they're educated about enough for people to really feel like they can understand it on their own without going really deeply into the scientific literature. But there are ways that you can understand it just in general patterns that your body tends to follow and then learning to speak the language of the body.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I like about you and many of the doctors that I follow. I think we're all ingrained, much like in the 90s, we were ingrained that it's, you eat fat, you're going to get fat. So there's been things that over the years have been ingrained in our brain that we kind of think that are correct because sometimes logically it sounds correct. But I think now it's been so ingrained that if you have some kind of mental illness, you have to take a pill right away for it. And to your point, maybe the problem is the gut, and you definitely don't want to add something to the gut and without it knowing what's going on first. And so a pill for every ill, unfortunately, is kind of the mentality now a lot of times nowadays. And sometimes you need to take a step back first and assess what's going on, and sometimes listen to your body. I think that's one of the biggest things that we don't, until I changed my lifestyle and diet and everything like that. I didn't know what that meant. If somebody would have told me that, I would have been like, what are you talking about? I know what's going on in my body, but I had no clue. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people really don't have as good of a clue until you actually do stop and really pay attention.
Absolutely. And I liked what you were pointing out of like the pill for every ill and then people listening, because I think we think of ills as like, oh, I have a headache, I should take an Advil, or I have joint pain, I should take this, or I have a stomach ache, I should take this. And we think of these as like annoyances or bad things that are happening in our body that we need to suppress, but really like it's our body asking for help. And so if we do that for 20 years and then we wonder why we have gut issues when we were just taking something to suppress the pain that our gut was expressing, it's kind of like taking a Sharpie and coloring over the check engine light on your dashboard. And so if we can really start to listen to the body, then we can figure out, I have stomach pain because I ate this food. And that means that food is irritating me. I wonder why that food is irritating me. Let me figure out if it's just that food or if it's when I combine it with other things or when it's at a certain time of the week or like a certain time in my life, or is it worse when I'm dealing with work stress? And then we can start to figure out how to have this relationship with our body where we're working with it instead of just driving it into the pavement as we go along. And I think that is how we create sustainability in our healthcare system rather than making it more of a sick care system.
Yes. Well, and to me, I was having this conversation with someone in my family recently because someone was sick and they had a fever. And I kept expressing how that's good. It's okay. Your body is supposed to be doing that. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to. Yes, I understand that they've had a fever for 2 or 3 days, but it wasn't like 104 temperature. So everything was fine. It was still just like 99, 100. But I said, it's okay. Your body's supposed to doing that. But she kept wanting to give this person some Tylenol and Advil and get that fever down. And I said, I understand that you are concerned about it, but it's only 99 and 100. This person's not quite ER ready yet. It's doing what it's supposed to. The body needs to do that. And it's, again, like you said, it's your body's way of communicating with you that something's going on and it's working hard to get it back to the way it's supposed to be or the best it can. And if you change what it's trying to do, that can then alter if it's able to accomplish what it's trying to do or not. And we don't always think about that. We just want that immediate quick fix, and sometimes it takes a while.
Well, and I think one of the things that we run into is like, we just want to feel better, right? Like we got stuff to do. I get it. Like we're busy, but also we have to acknowledge the pressures our society puts on us to be busy every single minute of every single day. And realistically, we're supposed to be like eating our recent kill by the river with our tribe. And the most effort we put in was like getting that kill. So if we can understand that we're supposed to take rest time, we understand that when we feel crummy, when we have a fever, when we have a cough, when we have all of those symptoms, it is our body going into a state where it's repairing. That's why like sometimes you'll be working really hard and then you go on vacation and then you get sick as soon as you go on vacation. It's because your body has finally entered a state where it's like, oh, we can rest and repair. I can finally turn the cortisol down. Because cortisol is that thing that blocks all of your symptoms and makes you feel better, which is why like you can feel really crummy at night when you have a cold because your cortisol is going down so you can sleep. And then you wake up in the morning and as the day goes on, you feel better because you have higher levels of cortisol and then you feel crummy in the evening again. But if we can get to a point where we're not having to push ourselves with all of that cortisol, then our body enters a state of rest. But that might mean sleeping and feeling crummy for like 3 or 4 days. And then all of a sudden you're renewed because your body had a chance to heal. So listening also involves resting when you're tired and listening to that tiredness. And I'm guilty of that. I ironically am like writing a class right now about modulating your rhythm. And it has made me reflect so much on how I have pushed my own boundaries on that. And I think we all require reflection at different times of figuring out what it actually feels like to be like, okay, I really am tired. I do need to rest. Or, all right, I've had a stomach ache for a month now. I should probably get this investigated. Or like headaches, we kind of write them off, but no, you're not supposed to have a headache every day or weekly or pretty much ever. So if we are having those, we should check out why.
Yeah. Oh, since you mentioned headaches, I was plagued with those all my life. It was awful for the first almost 50 years of my life, really. It was bad. But, and no one ever tested my hormones or, definitely no one ever did a stool test to check my gut or anything like that. And had I known then what I know now, I think my life would be very different. But then again, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. So now I'm fortunate enough to help people. So that's good. Which I think I just recently learned that you are a certified brain health coach at the Amen Clinics. Is that correct?
I am. Yeah, I really enjoyed learning from him. I think he has some wonderful material, and he's one of the only people that is prescribing pharmaceuticals for the brain that is actually imaging the brain. And I think that's a pretty cool and novel thing in that field, because most other fields image organs that they're treating. So why would you not do the same thing with the brain? And then he has a lot of natural tips on understanding like different kinds of depression or different kinds of ADD and what types of medications and things go best with that, or what types of supplements can help. But I really tend to orient it all back to holistic body systems, because I think when we focus on one organ at a time, we miss stuff. And so to me, if we can look at the whole system and kind of see what the body's doing nutritionally, we can figure out why that organ might be struggling. And there may be, direct damage to it from an injury or something, but a lot of the time it just has to do with our systems being a little bit dysregulated and figuring out where that dysregulation is coming from. And I think blood work and blood markers can be great indicators for that. And we have a tendency to isolate them and think like, oh, cholesterol means heart health, and if it's high, it's bad. Whereas that's not totally true. And cholesterol is actually also involved in forming our myelin sheaths and involved in forming our sex hormones and our vitamin D levels. And it is a repair molecule. So if it's high, it's an indicator to me that there's damage and inflammation going on somewhere in the body, and I need to investigate where it's coming from and not just put duct tape over that check engine light.
Right. Well, and now I work for the Amen Clinics now. And so I'm now starting to take the brain health coaching course myself as well, because I think that's going to help my own personal practice as well. But yeah, the brain is an amazing thing, isn't it?
It is an incredible organ. And I think probably one of the most complicated things in the universe. And I don't know if we'll ever fully understand it, but it is probably the greatest pharmacy we'll ever have access to. And we tend to demonize things like the placebo effect because it affects our research in a way that we don't like. But when we really look at it, the placebo effect means that your brain is able to create an outcome with literally no materials or substances. So your brain has the capacity to produce pretty much any chemical that you could need. And I think that's pretty amazing. Or like the fact that we can measure brain waves without an item touching your head, and we can measure it through basically magnetics. That means that you essentially emit your own Wi-Fi, and that is your biofield. And so when we start looking at our brain as not just this organ that directs stuff in our body, but really this connection to our energetic field and this director of our life force and this ability to alchemize whatever we need, it becomes much more profound.
Yeah. And before you were talking about gut health, and that's where some of our neurotransmitters are made, and some are made in the brain as well. So, which is why I know one of the things I was hoping to talk with you about today a little bit. So I think the two main ones that people think or know about really are dopamine and serotonin. But I'm even new, I will say, to GABA, which is gamma amino butyric acid. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can give a real simplified version of what they are and how they work in the body, where they're made, things like that. And even some simple things that people can do to help enhance or promote each one that don't involve medication. So if somebody thinks like, oh, I need to take an SSRI, well, let's think about, okay, what do you need for your serotonin? What or your dopamine, or why do you think you need that? So maybe you can give us what are the roles in the body for each one of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that is a complex question because they have a lot of different roles.
Yeah.
So it's pretty hard to say like one specific role. They do a lot of different things. You can think of our body as like a binary system, right? Kind of 0, 0, 1, 1. And that's kind of how our synapses work, is like the neuron is either on or it's off. But that neuron also has like 1,000 connections, and it is sending different neurotransmitters in different places. And the neurotransmitter might activate something that's actually inhibitory. So it's activating, but it's inhibiting in its activation. So that's why it can get a little complicated. But if I were to kind of summarize a little bit and talk just generally about the roles of them. So, dopamine is a classic one that people know, and we can think of it as kind of our motivation neurotransmitter and our ability to like check off stuff on the task list, our ability to focus in the moment, and also our ability to make decisions and our motor control. And so, the other place with motor control that people think of dopamine is Parkinson's. And so that's why in Parkinson's, you also have a little bit of trouble cognitively with decision-making and attention and things like that, because it has those multiple roles. But I think one of the foundational things about dopamine that people forget is it also shares biochemical pathways with our stress chemistry. So that's our epinephrine and norepinephrine, as well as our thyroid. And this is because of tyrosine, which is the amino acid precursor that builds all of these things. So it is an amino acid precursor for dopamine, and it is also a precursor for epinephrine and norepinephrine, norepinephrine being more of a neurotransmitter and epinephrine more coming from the adrenals, but both regulating our stress response, which downstream regulates things like our blood pressure and our blood sugar metabolism, all that. So with all of those, we can then also affect the thyroid, because if tyrosine is being used for our stress pathways and for our dopamine, then we don't have the building blocks for our T4 hormone, which gets converted to T3 in the liver and becomes this signal that activates our cells for burning fuel. So wrapping that all around, the same building block is used for our attention and focus, for our stress adaptation, and for our energy production. So if our diet isn't right and we're not getting enough tyrosine in our diet, which tends to be animal-based foods, so sometimes I'll see this with like vegan diets and things like that, but you can get it from a lot of sources. Just, being knowledgeable about these things and being like, oh, that is an important thing. If I'm feeling unmotivated or my stress response isn't responding super well, or my blood pressure's off, I wonder if some amino acid therapy could be helpful. And so with tyrosine and the whole dopamine pathway, that's just one of those. And then we have a whole bunch of other amino acids that are precursors for other neurotransmitters. And we can look at things like tryptophan, and tryptophan is a precursor for serotonin. And then each of these have to go through a process called methylation. And methylation is basically moving a molecular group around to make different molecules. So if we have tryptophan, it gets methylated into 5-HTP, and then that gets methylated into serotonin, and then that gets methylated into melatonin. So if we don't have enough tryptophan, we can't make our happy chemical, our serotonin, which is also highly involved in digestion. We actually have most of our serotonin in our gut. And if we don't have the ability to convert serotonin into melatonin, then we can have a hard time sleeping, and it can also affect our immune system. So lots of these pathways are all interconnected with each other. And I can keep going, but I'm going to stop on dopamine and serotonin in case you have any questions, because I think those are two of the most widely known.
Well, and I know for people in my age category, because I'm 51, almost 52 now, which is the height or the average age for those hitting menopause, which is definitely the time when people really struggle with sleep, which again, too, is a huge time when people can really struggle with that serotonin, and luckily my sleep has been okay, but there has been, it definitely has not been on point over the last, 6 to 8 months, I'll say, like it used to be. And so that's one of the things that I've been working on, is trying to fix my sleep. And serotonin is one of them that I've been working on. And I think so far it's actually helped quite a bit. But it's hard when you have a life filled with stresses, and then, an illness happens, or, you get a text from somebody, so life happens,
Well, and that's commonly one of the things I'll talk about with this, and why I wanted to bring, the stress pathway and understanding the adrenals and stuff into this conversation is because, if you're going through a stressful week at work, or you're going through a chronic stress, like say a drawn out divorce, or you've lost your home or your job, or you're injured or something like that, it actually can steal from all of these chemical pathways through something called the cortisol steal. And there's, a couple perspectives on it, but the general idea is that if your body is putting the building blocks towards stress, which is going to allow you to survive and run away from the tiger, so it's always going to prioritize that, you're stealing the building blocks from your other neurotransmitters and from your things like your sex hormones. And if you are in menopause where your hormones are depleted anyway, you're now taking even more vital resources away. And it can be really important to regulate your stress as a component of literally even helping your sleep as you're going through hormonal shifts, because your estrogen is changing, hormone levels are dropping, your body is adapting to things. And in all this, I think gut health is a huge part of it, and making sure that you're eating correctly and getting the building blocks that we're talking about. Because one of the other hidden things about serotonin that a lot of people don't know is if your gut is really inflamed and you're taking something like tryptophan, it can accidentally go down basically like kynurenine pathway, which is brain inflammation. And so I like to make sure that the gut is in working order before I start supplementing with serotonin, because we need to make sure that that inflammation level is down. And, one of the interesting things about like SSRIs, because you had mentioned those, is there is a meta study about a lot of the different studies around SSRIs. And they're finding that a lot of the benefits that we originally thought were because of a lack of serotonin in the brain are actually the anti-inflammatory benefits of the SSRI. So it's really that some of the depression and anxiety and things that people experience that they take those for anyway are more related to inflammation in the first place. So if we can really address the inflammation, especially in the gut, where we have more signals traveling from the gut to the brain through the vagus nerve than we do from the brain to the gut, that is a very profound way to affect mood and attention and anxiety and all of those things. So, if you're looking for alternatives, like focusing on these nutrients and understanding that, you may not have as much of a tolerance for eating crummy foods or drinking alcohol if you've had a super stressed out week, and understanding that relationship, it's going to make something that's significantly more sustainable for people, especially as they start to go through hormone fluctuations. Because then you can listen to your body and be like, oh, you know what? It was a really stressful week. Maybe I won't eat that birthday cake, or maybe I won't drink alcohol with this meal. Or if, the meal is going to have gluten and dairy and alcohol and sugar, maybe I'll only do the gluten and I'll skip the other ones. And then you start to create this not overburdening your body, and we keep the inflammation down, and then we keep the brain happier, and then you don't have the need for those.
That's so interesting that you said that, because I had not heard about that. I heard about the same type of similar thing happening with the statin medications, where the statin medications are more reducing the inflammation than doing what they had naturally thought they were creating the statin medication for. But so that's interesting. I had not heard of that, which, when I think back when I was on SSRIs, because I had taken them for a lot of years for depression and anxiety, and, thinking about all the other symptoms that I had in my body too, that just made sense. Yeah, I was riddled with inflammation, and again, no one was ever testing my hormones or checking my gut health or anything like that. So that's interesting. Yeah, I had not heard about that.
I love the lab testing for understanding someone's neurotransmitters, because I was thinking about this, like even in my own health journey, because I think I went through something that like a lot of teenage girls go through. And it's basically that your hormones are slightly off, or your cycle's slightly off, and they're like, okay, we'll just put you on birth control. So then you automatically get put on hormones at like 16 before your body's even had a chance to figure it out. And then you start getting fat and depressed because you're on birth control and you have leaky gut and nobody talked to you about your food. And so it's just getting worse, and you have more acne and all that, and you can't figure out why. And then you're sad about it because you're like 17 and in high school, and it's social, and all the social stress added on top of that. And then they put you on an antidepressant. And a lot of the time it's done through an interview, and there's not really any lab testing done around it. And that was what was done for my body. And I was put on Wellbutrin, which is norepinephrine and dopamine based. And I think about that, where, as a teenager with a forming brain, I was put on something that molded my neurotransmitters. And when I really think about what was going on at that time, and we think about the pathway, right? We just talked a whole bunch about that dopamine, noradrenaline pathway or norepinephrine pathway. I was probably in adrenal fatigue. I probably needed to rest, and I probably needed to take care of my adrenals, and that probably would have regulated my hormones, and I probably needed to stop drinking Dr. Pepper and eating bagels. But nobody talked to me about that. So it took me 4 years of being on that medication. I had like kind of 2 neurological episodes, and I kept raising the dose. No one really checked back in with me. And then finally I ended up I was starting to have panic attacks, and it didn't feel like me. It didn't feel like my body, and I couldn't understand it. And I went to this physical therapist who did neurological physical therapy, and basically through touch reset my nervous system with no substances at all. And my brain just like completely shifted. It was the first time I'd been out of fight or flight in years. And as I reflect on it, I was like, man, my body was already pushing really hard down a norepinephrine adrenaline based pathway. And then I got put on something that pushed it even harder down that pathway and then forgotten about for years. And it formed my brain during like those formative years. And so now I work with a lot of meditation and different things to calm my brain. But I always wonder, with all the people going through that, like I like to think, if we are using prescriptions, which I absolutely think they have their place, they can be really helpful for people. I don't necessarily think it's a great long-term solution. I think it can be a temporary solution, but I think we need to be looking for why they were off in the first place, because I may not have even needed it, nor have experienced any of those panic attacks if I had just been on it temporarily and had someone check back in and look at my blood work, which no blood work was ever taken around that, or just addressed my adrenals, which are all norepinephrine and dopamine, tyrosine based anyway.
Yeah. Well, and what are some symptoms, like if your dopamine is off, what are some symptoms that maybe people might experience? Because maybe that'll kind of give them a little, at least something to think about and think, okay, so this is what I'm experiencing possibly. And then we'll tell them some things they could maybe even do just naturally at home.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think this is a great question. So I start to think, and it's like we can think of adrenal dysregulation, but we're talking about the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And it's basically how they all interact with each other. And I think a lot of these symptoms can apply to a couple of those, but it's like experiencing problems falling or staying asleep, getting a second wind late at night, having energy highs and lows, feeling tired all the time, needing caffeine, going to bed late, getting less than 8 hours of sleep, things you used to enjoy seem like a chore, even like sex drive being lower, skipping meals can make you feel foggy and disoriented, that kind of thing. But, dopamine, again, I think of that happy reward-based neurotransmitter. So it's like if you do something, you check off that to-do list and you should feel good about it, and you just kind of feel empty about it, it's probably a sign your dopamine might be a little bit low. But a really gentle solution can be go and meditate for 20 minutes. And a single session of meditation can raise your dopamine 50%, 50%. And so that's, a way that you can realize when you're dysregulated. And one of the things I'll ask clients when they come in the office to kind of assess just adrenal dysregulation, I go, okay, tell me if this sounds like you. You wake up in the morning, you don't really feel rested, even though you slept. You're not super hungry, so you kind of fast. And then maybe you get hungry around lunchtime, and then you get kind of ravenous, and then you eat, and then you crash. And then you usually have that crash around like 2 to 3 p.m. And then you kind of get energy again in the evening. And then if you stay up past 8 p.m., you get a second wind, and then you don't go to bed until like 11 or midnight. And then you may or may not be able to sleep throughout the night. Does that sound like you? And a lot of the time they'll say yes. And that's like one of the first signs that there might be some adrenal dysfunction going on, or just dysfunction of the HPA axis in total, because it is the thing that regulates our rhythm and our whole system and our peripheral cellular rhythm. So if that central rhythm is off, our others know what time they're supposed to go into an active phase or a healing phase. And so we don't heal as well and things like that. So also like if you're not healing well, that system can be off. But again, that was kind of more like an HPA overview than just dopamine specifically. But it's hard to single them out because they all interact so much. And then, there's even other neurotransmitters we hadn't talked about, like GABA and glutamate and things like that. And they are excitatory or inhibitory, and they are also a part of this rhythm. And they can also be affected by things like amino acids, which are foundational in our diet. So when I work with clients, I tend to be more of a kind of foundation, cellular medicine, building block style approach. And so to me, I've had really good results with people just by doing some amino acid therapy, but I run labs to see where they're off and what we need to supplement in. And it's not permanent. It's for a period of time to get them balanced. And then the goal is to have them not need it, but teach them about it so that they can realize when they would benefit from it. And I think kind of that energy and the focus tend to be the ones I'd put around the dopamine.
Yeah. Well, and since you brought up GABA, that's one of the newer ones that I'm kind of now starting to get familiar with. I did have my brain scanned at the Amen clinics fairly recently. Okay. And that was one of the things that they said I could definitely benefit from. Again, for years, I had depression and anxiety and things like that. And just having something simple like GABA back then, instead of a medication, could have possibly made a world of difference to me, and people think, you have depression, so you have, a chemical imbalance. But yeah, maybe it's just, you just need a nutraceutical or a simple supplement, might totally help you. And it's not that you're stuck with it either, so tell us a little bit about GABA, because like you said, that one really helps with or excitability or anxiety. So that's a big one that people can really struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Dr. Amen has a number of different supplements that can be beneficial for all of these, and I really like the way that he's approached it. But one of the things I'll also find is some of my people that are in the most need of this and in the most neuroexcitatory state are those who have been through a toxin exposure like mold. And oftentimes they can't handle supplements that are a blend of stuff. So I'll start really individually. And I think one of the most complex but important things to learn about as a functional medicine provider or anyone doing this kind of work is cofactors. And cofactors are basically the other nutrients that our body needs in order for a certain neurotransmitter or enzymatic process to happen. And for GABA, those cofactors are B6 and magnesium. And I also really like glycine. It's like a component of going into the GABA pathway. But especially depending on your genetics, because there's an enzyme called glutamate decarboxylase, and that one needs magnesium as a cofactor. So if you are a person where your genetics mean that you need more magnesium to make that enzyme work better, magnesium might actually really help you produce more GABA. So my goal is always, how can I work really upstream and provide the body what it already naturally uses to coax it in the direction that we want to go, instead of changing the pathway itself or inhibiting anything in particular. And I think that is a really nice way to start to bring the body back into balance, because it's still using its own systems. So GABA in itself is inhibitory, so it tends to be calming for the brain. And you can take there's GABA chewables, you can take GABA directly, there's pharmaceuticals. But, sometimes the pharmaceuticals that end up using GABA are a little bit more intense and have some interesting side effects. So it can be really beneficial to try to focus on just some B vitamins and some minerals and see how you do. Or try some glycine, which is beneficial in many ways because it's the most abundantly used amino acid in the body. It's beneficial for phase 2 detox in the liver. It is helpful for forming GABA, and it also recycles our glutathione. And glutathione is, we haven't even talked about that yet. It's our major
That's huge,
cellular antioxidant in the body, responsible for a ton of cellular functions. And so if we can do all of that with a single amino acid that we can drink in a naturally sweet powder before bed, I'll even use it with kiddos who are having trouble sleeping because it's safe for them. So there's ways that you can work really, really simply with these pathways.
What glutathione do you use that's in the sweet drink?
No, so glycine naturally recycles glutathione. And I actually really like it because it's not sulfur-based. And one of the other things that I'll find with anyone who's in an excitatory state, or they're dealing with histamine symptoms, they all tend to go together, right? When our system's just overstimulated. I find they don't always respond well to sulfur, like glutathione or N-acetylcysteine, which you would normally think of for recycling glutathione. So glycine is a very gentle, non-sulfur-based way to recycle your glutathione naturally.
What drink do you recommend?
Glycine is just an amino acid. You can get it anywhere at a natural health store. I often use the brand Designs for Health, but glycine is naturally sweet. So it's just that amino acid by itself in water is beneficial for calming the brain, helpful for sleep, helpful for recycling antioxidants, helpful for detox, and safe enough I could give it to a child or someone who's pregnant.
The one that you said that you just got really excited about, is that one on full script?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Oh,
absolutely.
okay. I'm going to look for it on full script.
Yeah.
I like taking things before bed, especially if it's kind of natural. Sometimes I like experimenting, and I like switching things up once in a while too, and not always taking the same thing. And
Well, I find sleep is interesting for people. It varies from person to person on what's needed. Like L-theanine is another really calming one that I like. And I know a lot of people tend to lean towards melatonin, and that can be beneficial, but melatonin is also a little bit more of a hormone. So I like to do it intermittently rather than it being something that's regular. And I encourage people to rotate things. But the other thing that I look at now, if you're dealing with, like menopause or like your chemistry shifting, that's a little bit different when you're working on sleep. But one of the things I really like to encourage people to do is to meditate before bed. Or if that feels effortful, just listen to a meditation. Like there's one that I listen to a lot, and it's just kind of like her speaking mildly poetically in the background, and something about her voice is just rhythmic, and it distracts my brain from overthinking, and it just helps me fall asleep. And I think a lot of the time we just lay down in the quiet and we expect our brain to quiet down, and that's really when we struggle. So I'll ask people about their sleep. I'm like, okay, do you have trouble falling asleep? Do you have trouble staying asleep? Is it dreams that you're dealing with? Is it hot flashes that you're dealing with? Is it just the running mind? Because all of those, we might use different things to help the sleep.
yeah, especially different times that you might wake up in the night too. That can tell a lot of what's going on in your body as well, whether it's liver related or blood sugar crashes, or no, you just had to get up and go to the bathroom, which can very well be too.
Absolutely.
So what kind of lifestyle factors? I know that you mentioned meditation. And what was the name of the app that you recommend, or are there a couple that you like?
Yeah, there's a variety of them. I often use Insight Timer. There's a gal on there named Sarah Blondin who I just really like her stuff. She's the one with the very rhythmic voice. I also have some guided meditations that I've made over the years and made for clients in different ways. And that is just available on my website at any time. And it's just finding something that works for you and a voice that works for you. Sometimes I change it up. And just exploring stuff. Like there's so many free resources on YouTube and tons of other things. So there's really no shortage of them.
And before we were kind of touching on the gut health. So when we were talking about neurotransmitters, is there anything that you recommend that people include to help their gut health that's going to definitely help their neurotransmitters? Or is there something that you would recommend that they steer clear of?
Yeah. I'm going to answer that in two parts. So for the gut health, it depends on your case. And I know that's an annoying answer and everyone just wants a clear-cut answer, but my answer is always it depends on your case. So if someone is dealing with parasites, they might be struggling waking up at night because parasites are active at night and they're more active during the full moon. So like if your sleep cycle is really disrupted during the full moon, it might mean that you need to do a gut cleanse. However, I know it's also been like a little bit of a trend to just do like a huge parasite cleanse and do no testing and no evaluation of your body. And I highly recommend getting your body evaluated because it may or may not be right. I'm making generalized comments. So as always, please consult your practitioner. But it might be that you have some kind of infection that you're dealing with and your gut is inflamed and it's disrupting your serotonin, which is disrupting your melatonin and your sleep pathways and making you more anxious than normal. Because that's the other thing is like when you're super inflamed, your brain chemistry gets inflamed and then your thinking process gets inflamed. So this is like one of the things that I try to orient people around is that you can apply our cellular healing process to your physical body, to your chemical body, and to your mental body. And if you're feeling really inflamed in your thinking process and you're just, your thoughts tend to be negative or inflammatory to your life or whatever, check in with yourself and give yourself a little forgiveness and be like, am I really thinking like this? Or does my chemistry feel off? Because I think something's off. And then it can mean like, oh, maybe I have been overdoing it on the gluten this week. Maybe I just need to back off. And I try to be realistic with people because just cutting a bunch of foods out of your diet forever can sometimes make you depressed and feel really restricted. So rather than telling people they can never have something, I educate them on how it affects their body. And I help them to identify how it affects their body. And then they can choose to have it sometimes, but they can realize when they've overdone it. And it's just this lifelong learning process. And so that all comes back to the gut and maintaining your gut. If you're dealing with, leaky gut issues, which I usually will assume that's happening if you are dealing with some of the symptoms that we've been talking about, just because it's usually one of the first stages. Plus, it's kind of like, our skin, it's our barrier to the outside. It deals with the outside environment more than any other part of our body. So it is taxed a lot, and it requires more maintenance than other organs because it does so much. And we also have the whole microbiome that we're balancing. And if we, eat a diet that's not great, it feeds our microbiome in a weird way. And then our microbiome produce their own chemicals that affect our brain and things like that. But in general, I think, consuming bone broth or something with glutamine can be really, really helpful. It's just known to be really healing to the gut. Zinc carnosine is one of my other favorites. You can work with more advanced things that help to heal the gut lining, like slippery elm or marshmallow or licorice. But those I tend to use in cases where people aren't quite as bad. If you're really sensitive, just starting with like zinc carnosine is usually a good place to start. And I always encourage people to get things through food naturally. So if you can make a homemade bone broth, that is going to have your collagen, your minerals, your B vitamins, your glutamine, all the things that you need to heal your gut. And then you can drink that as a beverage. You can cook rice in it. You can use it to simmer your veggies. And it's just like a great thing to incorporate into your cooking all the time. So I almost always have fresh bone broth in the fridge. I use it a lot. And then making sure that you're getting enough veggies in your diet so that you are feeding your microbiome. But there's also interesting studies showing that you get a robust microbiome through the carnivore diet as well. And it's just figuring out what makes you feel good. I tend to rotate people through diets depending on what their body's doing. Some of my super sensitive people, like I have some people with ulcerative colitis, they can't handle veggies. They can't handle the roughage. And so they're doing more of a carnivore diet, and then we implement fiber where we can. But you can get a lot from that, but just making sure that you're getting some fiber, you're getting protein, and you're getting healthy fats. Those are like the foundational nutrients, and that can come from a lot of different sources. And if you are vegan, that's okay, but you just have to make sure that you're getting some of the nutrients that aren't available to you if you're not consuming an animal-based diet, like B12 or certain types of healthy fats, things like that. Carnitine is one of my other favorites, and that really supports the mitochondria. And when it comes to the gut health, realizing again, it's a system that we're maintaining. If you're just going after one organ, you're usually missing something, and the gut can't heal if the adrenals are off. So all the stuff that we talked about at the beginning, I'm going to bring it full circle and say, like, if that system is off, your gut's going to have a really hard time healing no matter how well you're eating. So you also need to be regulating your stress and checking in with your adrenals and making sure that you're getting enough vitamin C and making sure that you're doing stress reduction and that you're not stuck in a fight or flight state, which can be triggered by the inflammatory thoughts, making sure that you're managing your thinking. And that's kind of how I think of meditation. People are like, well, how is meditation and the gut related? It's like, well, if we're meditating, it's really giving our body an opportunity to feel safe. Meditation can come in a lot of forms, but it's the opportunity to go inward, stop thinking about your problems, stop thinking about your identity, and just be present in the moment and allow your body and your cells to feel safe because you're not worried about the future. You're not thinking about the past. You're just present. And that allows our body to enter a healing state. And then the other interesting thing with stress in the gut that a lot of people don't know is when we're stressed out, we have gram-negative bacteria in the gut, which means bacteria that produce nasty chemicals, and they respond to our stress hormones. They actually have receptors for them. So when we're stressed out, nasty bacteria in our gut grow. If we're constantly stressed, we constantly grow dysbiosis, and it means that we have to be more careful with our food. So this is how that mental stress, physical stress, chemical stress, they all balance each other. If you're mentally stressed out, you're not going to have a chemical or a physical capacity. If you're physically injured, you're not going to have mental emotional resilience, and you should be a little bit gentler with yourself because your body only has so many resources and it has to put it in different places. So that's kind of a long-winded answer about how to maintain your gut, but I think it comes the signals from your brain, the nutrients you're putting in your body, and making sure that you're actually having a bowel movement every day. I think a lot of people don't know that's supposed to happen, but if you're not, go talk to somebody because you need to be able to detoxify.
Yeah. Well, and one of the biggest things my husband says to me is I do a lot of the other things right, but he's like, you're stressed out all the time. That can't be good. and I'm, it is hard to, turn the switch off as far as, cause that's one of my problems is, when I go to the grocery store, I'll see people with the grocery cart full of all the food that they're going to eat. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you should not be eating that. Nobody should be eating that, or, when I see family or friends eating certain things, or and I'm like, oh my gosh, do you know how many chemicals you're putting in your body right now? And, just little things like that. I'm constantly trying to turn that switch off. And so, yeah, I'm trying to incorporate some more meditation and breathing myself. That's one of the things we learned in my first school that I took. And until I had done that, I never really thought about how breathing or meditation would really make a big difference. And I did notice a difference, just during our classes when they forced us to practice doing that. I was like, oh my goodness. So I do that with clients on occasion as well. So I definitely am 100% on board and agreement with practicing some kind of meditation, or just taking a few minutes of quiet time and trying to quiet your mind and your body, because and you said yourself that you are big into the nervous system, that all connects. The vagus nerve is all connected. It literally talks and touches the brain to the gut, and so, yeah, it's going to definitely affect it for the good or for the bad.
Well, and I think one of the perspectives that I've always enjoyed taking on meditation is, just like we have to relieve our bladder of waste, or we have to relieve our bowel of waste, we need to relieve our mind of waste. It's basically a body function. So meditation is an opportunity to allow your brain to relieve its waste, whether that's wasteful thoughts, wasteful chemistry, wasteful anything. And it's just like a reset for your brain. And then you had also commented on, people at the grocery store filling their cart with all this fake food. And yeah, actually, that's the way I'm going to say it. It's fake food. It's not actually food. And there's an interesting trick in NLP, which is like neuro-linguistic programming. And sometimes I'll do this. It's kind of like a way of subconsciously reprogramming the mind for clients, especially around like cravings or addictions that they have. And it's an exercise where you basically visualize what you really like. You figure out like where it is in space. And then you visualize something that you really don't like, and you visualize it in space. Then you overlay them on each other, and then you replace it with the thing you want to replace it with. So, if we think about all the food in the cart that's in a bag or in a box, and it's been shaped into some other shape by some machine after it was like excreted out of some other machine, it's not really food anymore. And we can consider food whole foods, right? Because whole foods actually have information from nature that we're never going to fully understand. Like, let's just be real. Our world is way too complex for us to fully comprehend it as humans. And there are energetic frequencies and things that we just don't completely understand about the molecular makeup of organisms on this planet that we are supposed to be consuming as our nutrients, rather than the chemicals that we turn it into and then shape into some paste and harden into some shapes that we then eat. And if we can start to think about those things as fake food, you then realize that eating what got excreted out of a machine isn't necessarily that appetizing. And then we can start to replace it with that image of what we would want to have, which is like a plate full of nutritious foods that are ingredients instead of made of ingredients.
Ooh, I'm going to use that with some of my clients. I think I have one client that's a little stuck right now, and I think that may help her get a little unstuck.
It's a great trick, and I'll credit that comment of food made of ingredients or food that are ingredients instead of made of ingredients to James Berry, who invented the brand Pluck, which is basically organ meat seasoning. And he was a professional chef. And I really loved how he talked about that. And then the neurolinguistic programming, it's a great tool that a lot of people can use, and you can learn how to use it, or you can do it with a facilitator, and it can be really incredible for transforming the subconscious mind. So for anyone listening, if you're struggling with making these changes and struggling with habits in your life, which is usually where we all struggle, because also if you're struggling with dopamine, it's really hard to change habits, then you can work with people who do that. And like I do that myself, or I learned from basically coaches in Jaeger training. So there's a lot of different resources for it.
Yeah, it's great visioning when you really get down, it's the peeling back the layers of the onion. And when you get to it, what did it originally start as? And then it morphs into something else, and it's still not an onion anyway you slice it. Literally.
Absolutely.
Well, as we wrap up today, I always like to ask my guests for their don't miss this moment. And it would be kind of the one takeaway that they would want the listeners to really kind of think about or take home. If they kind of would remember one thing, what would that be?
Listening to your body and learning how to check in with yourself, and realizing that if you are having a really emotional week or really inflammatory thoughts, or your sleep is super off, or you're having a bunch of headaches, or your stomach is upset, or you haven't had a normal bowel movement in a couple days, that's your check engine light. That is your body telling you something is off. Check on me. Ask me what I need. And it might be water, it might be sleep, it might be breath, it might be meditation, it might be a different type of food, it might be working with a practitioner so that you can get down to like what's really going on. But we can get weird gut upset from anything, from stress to drinking the wrong water to whatever. It's just like, it's a part of our environment. We live with microbes and different things, but understanding that can get dysregulated. And just because your emotions are off or you're stressed out doesn't mean that you're broken. It means that your neurochemistry is off and that you need to check in and ask your body what's going on and use that as a compass for the goals that you want to achieve in your health.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think and I definitely was guilty of this. I don't think many people have a goal when it comes to their health and wellness. I think that some people are really good at putting money in the savings account for when their retirement comes, but they don't think about their health retirement and what that's going to look like. So yeah, start the check engine light now.
That's a very good way to put it, like a health savings account. I like that. It's true. Like, we only have so many resources. So how do you want to spend them and how can you replenish them are the questions. And that's where all the cool stuff like biohacking comes in.
Well, where can all my listeners find you, follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to my website, Depth Wellness, DEPTH, like you have depth, wellness.com. I'm also on Instagram and I'm always posting stuff there. It's just Instagram at Dr. Christine Smith, all one word. And then I'm even going to be teaching a little workshop after this, all about maintaining your rhythm in your body and understanding kind of those biohacking tricks for your circadian hormones and things like that. And you can access that through Instagram or on my website under links. And even if you're not able to attend, there will be a recording afterwards. But I'm always doing little webinars and things like that because I think what you're doing and what other docs are doing, where we're trying to educate the public so that they can become their own health authority and understand how their body works rather than feeling like such a victim and that only something from the outside can fix them, I think is the evolution of healthcare. So I really appreciate people like yourself getting this knowledge out there and providing a community for people to discuss it in. And I think the community and the education is really what's going to further our goals as a society.
Yeah, I definitely think that I'm grateful for doctors like you who are out there that don't just give a pill for every ill and that really try to figure out the root. And like you said, I definitely think that there can be medication at certain points that can be helpful to get you out of more an immediate situation and then work on getting your body back to a good normal. But yeah, I definitely am appreciative for other doctors and people like you who are out there constantly. You do way more work than I do, that's for sure. Constantly pounding the pavement and telling people, things that they can do for themselves, so they don't have to be stuck or beholden to somebody else for their own health, So that's great. Well, thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you. And I think just, being kind to yourself in the process, knowing that it's a journey and we're always learning, it's the best approach, and just doing it day by day and listening to your body.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you looking for a good probiotic? Seed DS1 Daily Synbiotic has both prebiotic and probiotic. It supports digestive health, heart health, skin health, and gut health, including those who suffer with IBS. Their products are clinically studied and third-party tested for quality, and I think you'll be impressed with their eco-friendly packaging. Click the link in the show notes and use my code FORGIVEN for 15% off your first month's supply. If you want to continue learning and hearing all things nutrition for your mind, body, and spirit, click like, subscribe, or favorite me on whatever podcast platform you use. Or you can find me at ForgivenNutritionist.com. This podcast was designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to achieve your health and wellness goals with your current healthcare provider. It is not meant to diagnose or treat any illness or medical condition or take the place of any treatments from your current healthcare providers.